In January 2020, a woman was photographed on a beach in Hawaii. She was smiling. She and her new husband looked happy, tanned, relaxed, unbothered. Back in Idaho, investigators were desperately searching for her 2 children, who had not been seen since September. The children were 7-year-old Joshua, everyone called him JJ, and 16-year-old Tylee. They were siblings. They were inseparable. They were, by this point, already dead. Their mother was posing for photos on the beach. Her name is Vallow Daybell. She has been called the Doomsday Mom, one of the most hated women in America. A woman who chose a man, a delusion, and a desire to be free over the lives of her own children. She is now serving multiple consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Her husband has been sentenced to death. This is the story of how 2 children were murdered, and the web of religion, obsession, and calculated deception that made it possible. Before anything else, before the beliefs and the backyard graves and the Hawaii honeymoon photos, you need to know who JJ and Tylee were. Joshua Jackson Vallow, known to everyone as JJ, was 7 years old. He had been adopted by Lori and her 4th husband Charles Vallow in 2014, as a toddler. JJ had autism. He was also, by every account from those who knew and loved him, extraordinarily bright. His grandmother Kay Woodcock told the court at sentencing that JJ had been reading at a middle school level by the time he was 4 years old. "I continually wonder what he would have become," Kay said in her victim impact statement. "What type of man would he be? What did Lori deprive the world of?" Tylee Ryan was 16 years old. She was Lori's daughter from her 3rd marriage, close to her mother for most of her childhood, close to her little brother JJ, and by multiple accounts a normal, funny, occasionally difficult teenager trying to figure out who she was. Her older brother Colby Ryan would later address his mother in court. "Tylee and JJ brought so much light into this world," he said. And then, looking at the woman who had once been his mother, "I believe that Lori Vallow herself is the family tragedy." In October 2018, Lori Vallow attended a religious conference in Utah. She was still married to her 4th husband, Charles Vallow. She had her children. She had a life. At that conference, she encountered Chad Daybell, a self-published author of apocalyptic fiction loosely based on Mormon doctrine, who gave talks about end-times prophecies, visions of the future, and what he claimed was a direct spiritual connection to the afterlife. He was also married to a woman named Tammy Daybell, with whom he had 5 children. According to investigators, Lori and Chad felt what they described as an instant connection. They told people they had been married in a past life. They began exchanging messages almost immediately, first through a podcast they produced together about religious topics, then through increasingly intimate emails and texts. Their shared belief system had drifted far from mainstream religion into something far darker. Both claimed to be able to identify whether people around them had been overtaken by evil spirits they called zombies. Those they designated as zombies were considered spiritually dead, beyond saving. And in their framework, that spiritual designation had terrifying real-world implications. As their relationship intensified throughout 2019, the people standing between them and a life together began to die. By early 2019, Charles Vallow had filed for divorce from Lori. In the court filing, he stated that his wife had threatened to kill him. In a conversation captured on police body camera footage, Charles told officers directly, "She threatened me, murder me, kill me." He believed his wife had been radicalized. He told friends she claimed to have lived on other planets. He was frightened. On July 11, 2019, Lori's brother Alex Cox shot Charles Vallow to death in an Arizona home, claiming self-defense. Alex said Charles had attacked him with a baseball bat. Lori and the children had conveniently left the house just before the shooting. Alex was not arrested. He died 5 months later of what medical examiners said was a blood clot, a death that has never been fully resolved. Then, in October 2019, Chad Daybell's wife Tammy died unexpectedly at their Idaho home. Medical examiners initially listed her cause of death as natural, a heart condition. She was 49 years old. 2 weeks after Tammy's death, Chad and Lori were married in Hawaii. Tylee and JJ had last been seen alive in September 2019. In late November 2019, JJ's grandparents, Kay and Larry Woodcock, contacted police in Rexburg, Idaho, because they had not been able to speak to JJ in weeks. This was unusual. Kay spoke to JJ regularly. The calls had stopped after Charles's death. On November 26th, police conducted a welfare check at the home where Lori and Chad were living. The children were not there. Lori told officers JJ was staying with a family friend in Arizona. Police could not locate him there either. When officers returned the next day with a search warrant, Lori and Chad were gone. They turned up in Hawaii in January 2020, tanned, smiling, celebrating their new marriage. When Lori was served with a court order to produce her children, she did not comply. She was arrested in Hawaii in February 2020 on an Idaho warrant. Asked directly where her children were, she said they were safe. She smiled. She gave no location. They had been dead for 5 months. On June 9, 2020, investigators executed a search warrant on Chad Daybell's property in Salem, Idaho. They brought cadaver dogs. They brought ground-penetrating radar. In the backyard, among the trees, in shallow graves, they found human remains. JJ Vallow had been wrapped in plastic bags and buried. He had been dead for approximately 9 months. His little body showed signs of having been bound. Tylee Ryan's remains were in an adjacent location. She had been partially cremated in an attempt to destroy forensic evidence. Investigators found her mixed with animal remains in what appeared to be a fire pit. She was 16 years old. The images from that backyard, which emerged through the trial, were described by a juror as the most disturbing thing she had ever seen in her life. As one of Lori's sisters said to her in a recorded phone call played in court after the children's remains were found, "You threw them away like garbage." Prosecutors established that JJ was likely killed between September 22 and 23, 2019. Tylee was believed to have been killed between September 8 and 9, the day after she was last photographed, at Yellowstone National Park, during what appeared to be a final family outing. In the months between their deaths and their discovery, Lori had continued to collect their Social Security benefits. She was also charged with grand theft for stealing payments intended for their care. Throughout the investigation and trials, the question that haunted everyone was the same. How does a mother kill her own children? Prosecutors offered a framework built on 2 things: a twisted belief system and cold, calculated self-interest. Lori and Chad had developed a shared spiritual worldview in which they assigned people around them labels: light beings, dark beings, or zombies, individuals they believed had been spiritually overtaken by evil. Once someone was designated a zombie, they were considered beyond saving. Text messages presented at trial showed Lori and Chad discussing whether various people around them, including the children, had been taken over. JJ was referred to in coded language as a zombie in their private communications. Tylee had become a liability. But prosecutors also made clear this was not purely delusional. There was money involved. A life insurance policy on Charles Vallow worth $1 million. Social Security benefits for the children. A prenuptial arrangement. And most of all, a desire to start a new life with Chad Daybell, unencumbered by the children she now appeared to view as obstacles. Sex, money, and power, the lead prosecutor said in Chad Daybell's trial. That was the real motive. The religious framework was the excuse, the cover story that made the unthinkable feel justified. Lori Vallow stood trial in Idaho in spring 2023. Her defense argued she was a woman of deep faith, a loving mother, and that whatever had happened to the children, Lori had not physically carried it out. She did not take the stand. Her defense called no witnesses. On May 12, 2023, a jury found her guilty on all charges: 2 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, and grand theft. On July 31, 2023, she was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. She showed almost no emotion. Chad Daybell's trial followed in April 2024. Prosecutors presented phone records, autopsy reports, text messages, and evidence that he had buried the children himself. On May 30, 2024, he was convicted on all counts: 3 murders, conspiracy, and insurance fraud. On June 1, 2024, Chad Daybell was sentenced to death. He now sits on Idaho's death row. Lori was subsequently extradited to Arizona, where she faced charges for conspiring to murder her 4th husband Charles Vallow. She chose to represent herself, claiming she had real trial experience from studying case law in prison. In April 2025, she was convicted in Arizona of conspiracy to commit murder. In July 2025, she received 2 additional life sentences, to be served consecutively after her Idaho sentences. She told the court in a 2025 television interview, her first ever, that Jesus had shown her she and Chad would be exonerated and released from prison in the future. The question this case asks, and never quite answers, is one of the most difficult in human experience. How does a person arrive at a place where they can bury their 7-year-old in a backyard? Where they can drive to Hawaii and take smiling photos while their children's bodies decompose under the soil? The court proceedings revealed a woman who had constructed an elaborate spiritual reality that insulated her from the moral weight of what she was doing. And alongside that reality, investigators showed, in text message after text message, a woman who also knew exactly what she was doing, why she was doing it, and how to cover it up. The belief and the calculation were not opposites. They worked together. The belief made the calculation feel righteous. The calculation made the belief feel necessary. JJ Vallow would have been 12 years old in 2024, the year his stepfather was sentenced to death for killing him. Tylee Ryan would have been 21. Old enough to vote. Old enough to have started building her own life. JJ Vallow was 7 years old. He was reading at middle school level. He loved his grandmother's phone calls. He had autism and an entire life waiting to unfold. Tylee Ryan was 16. She was her mother's daughter. She went to Yellowstone the day before she was killed, hiking through one of the most beautiful places in the country, unaware it was the last thing she would ever see. The woman responsible for their deaths is in prison for the rest of her life. The man who buried them is on death row. And the state of their remains, and what was done to them in that backyard, will never leave the investigators who found them or the jurors who saw the evidence. Some crimes rupture something in the way we understand the world. This is one of them. Subscribe to Quick Crime Vault. Every case in this vault deserves to be told. Every name deserves to be remembered. We'll see you in the next vault.